There comes a time when a subject is important enough that it deserves a more well thought out and properly written video instead of just a rambling, and this is one of those times.
Like my Are Video Games Art video, a subject about video games being seen as a viable form of art has been a debate that's been around for years, and Rambling Vlog wouldn't do it justice. The same goes for violence in video games. It's a subject that's drenched in controversy as thick as molasses. If I just did a quick rambling, then I would not only do a disservice to the debate, but a disservice to any argument that I bring up, as it may not have been thought out as much. This is actually the third revision that I've written about this subject. The first went from well thought out to an angry rant, and the second had a terrible introduction where just starting over was easier than reworking on it. This is a subject that I mentioned in a few videos that I would talk about, and it's actually been a year since I wrote the first draft.
It's a touchy subject, and I could say that there is no connection and that people are just looking for a scapegoat, but that would just dismiss the entire argument if I didn't back it up with valid reasons.
We can actually date this controversy back to 1976, with an arcade game called Death Race, also known by its alternative title, Death Race 2000. The object of the game was to run over things called gremlins, who would scream and gravestones would appear where you ran them over. The game featured monochrome graphics and the gremlins were stick figures, and the game's working title was called Pedestrian. Now to us, this is nothing, as we've seen far worse, but in 1976, this was a huge thing. Fast forward to the late 90s, where violent crimes were being committed and video games were taking the blame. And ever since then, it's been a really hot topic whenever something terrible happens because someone in their teens or early 20s are the ones who committed said act. We have activists such as Jack Thompson, who was a Florida lawyer until he was disbarred, being one of the biggest and loudest spokesmen for being against violent video games, rap music, and Howard Stern.
That's a strange list to be against. I guess violent rock music, violent movies, and cartoon violence are perfectly okay for him.
Why do video games get the blame for violent actions? Simply put, it's their interactivity, leading people like Jack Thompson to call them murder simulators. That's probably one of the silliest things I've ever heard, calling a video game a murder simulator. If anyone calls a game a murder simulator, then you have my permission to call them a retard. There is a difference between holding a weapon and holding a controller. If someone really wants to push the murder simulator, then why not laser tag or paintball? Those are two sports that never get the murder simulator brand. And think about it, you're given a physical object in the real world that fires a projectile, either a ball or a laser beam, and you fire it at real people. If someone is against violent video games, then they should, logically, be against paintball and laser tag. But we never hear anything about that, and why is that?
Here's a controller, and here's a gun analog. Now, which one do you think I'm going to get more practice with? This or this?
When it comes to moral crusaders like Jack Thompson, we can at least understand and see where he's coming from. A moral crusader is trying to make the world a better place, although 99.99% of them are misguided fools, going about the wrong way or trying to insist on redundant laws, and I'll bring that up later. But then you have the news media demonizing games, but they're not doing it for any reason other than it being a hot topic and for money. Oh, where can I start from there? The media companies like Fox News, for example, don't want you playing video games. Not because they think they're violent, but what do you need to play a video game with? You need a TV. And if you're playing a video game, what are you not doing? You're not watching TV. If you're not watching TV, then TV networks aren't making any money as the advertisements that pay for the television programming go unwatched. So the TV networks would love for video games to go away. Like when a Fox affiliate demonized the PSP as a device that could pull porn out of thin air, when the reality is that any device with a wireless connection can do that.
It's all to get ratings. Remember swine flu from a couple of years ago, trying to scare people into watching the news when in reality, nothing really happened.
I don't watch the news because of their sleazy, underhanded, and downright evil ways in trying to get me to watch that bile that spews from their mouths, that older people who grew up with Tom and Jerry will gobble up. We have these people who grew up with Tom and Jerry, one of the most violent cartoons ever created. But that didn't stop them from criticizing Beavis and Butthead, a cartoon I never watched because I thought it was stupid and creepy looking. Well, some kid somewhere shoved a firecracker up a cat's butt and killed it, because they claimed that Beavis and Butthead did it. As far as I knew, the kid was never caught, and for all we know, the kid never watched that episode but thought of it on his own. But did you see what I just did? I went from violent video games to violent cartoons. Now, why is that? Well, let's look at history. Whenever someone does something horrible, people look for a reason, and when a reason cannot be found quickly, they look for a scapegoat. Now it's violent video games. Before that, it was violent cartoons. Before that, it was rap music. Before that, it was violent movies. Before that, it was rock music. Before that, it was books. And before that, it was the devil.
With all our advances in modern medicine and psychology, why are we still looking for scapegoats? Have we become stupid enough as a society to not blame the criminal for their actions?
But even now, there are psychological tests about video games and violence. For every test that says yes, violent video games increase aggression, there's one that says no, they don't. And that's another point I'll come back to later. But first, let's look at the Columbine High School shooting. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold committed the act and took their own lives, and people wonder to this day why they did what they did. One of them said that committing the act was going to be just like Doom, so Violent Games took the blame. But let's look deeper into it. Harris started a site for hosting their own Doom levels they created, but then Harris created a blog, making jokes about parents in the school, but later graduated on how to make mischief and explosives, and chronicling the trouble he and Klebold got into. And later his aggression towards society surfaced. Klebold gave the website address to a kid, and that kid's mother filed numerous complaints against Harris, thinking he was dangerous, and rightfully so. Eventually Harris would talk to a psychiatrist about chronic depression, being angry, and having suicidal thoughts.
Now keep that in mind, it is very important to a point that I'll be making later.
Harris prescribed 2 different antidepressants, both of which had a side effect of increased aggression, loss of remorse, depersonalization, and mania. We all know what happened. They went to school and did what they did. When Harris's website was made public by the news, they permanently deleted it. Video games, bullying, and even the goth subculture took blame for it as people searched for a reason why Harris and Klebold committed this heinous act. Years later, there was the Virginia Tech shooting, committed by, and I can't pronounce his first name so I'll just call him Cho. In middle school, he was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder known as selective mutism, and was manic depressive. He was in therapy, but we know what he did. And video games were quickly blamed until his roommates said that he didn't play any video games. I think the media saying that Cho played video games was due to the stereotype that Koreans have a game addiction problem.
And honestly, I don't even want to bring these monsters up. I really don't. But I feel that if I didn't, my points would have no merit at all. Especially with this next one.
Adam Lanza. Yeah, you probably saw this one coming. During the investigation, Lanza was found with his brother's ID on him. When it was reported, people flocked to his brother's Facebook page and saw that he liked Mass Effect, and video games took the blame once again. Even one of the investigators said it was because of Violent Games that Lanza did what he did. But upon further investigation, it was found that Lanza played non-violent games like Dance Dance Revolution and Super Mario Bros. But by that time, Vice President Joe Biden said that the video game industry needs to take responsibility for their games, and the president said he would put more money into the research of violent media and violent behavior. However, no one even acknowledges what Lanza's father told investigators. He said his son was diagnosed with sensory integration disorder when starting elementary school, and was later diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is an autism spectrum disorder, when he was 13. He also had obsessive compulsive disorder. He became a shut-in, cutting off communication with his father and brother, and he only communicated with his mother, who he lived with, through emails. He became obsessed with mass murderers. How that went unnoticed is beyond me. His father suspected that his son might have had undiagnosed schizophrenia or psychopathy, and the science may have been missed as Lanza's odd behavior was due to him having Asperger's syndrome.
And that's my point. These monsters were psychotic and mentally ill, and they needed help, but no one did anything to help them in the way that they needed it.
If you're a parent and your kid is displaying very odd behavior, it's your duty to have them checked out. That's how you prevent these things from happening. Some people are mentally ill. They're either born that way or they become that way, and if that person doesn't get the help they need, they may just snap and go insane. The examples I gave could have been prevented if their parents or an adult or an authority figure or even a friend of the perpetrator had said, "Hey, something's wrong with them. I should do something to get them help." The mother who thought that Eric Harris was dangerous and reported that he might be dangerous, she did the right thing but was ignored. You can't ignore a report of someone who may be dangerous and mentally unstable. It needs to be taken seriously. You can't go on a witch hunt when something terrible happens because it's easier to find a scapegoat rather than do some actual investigative work, or if the scapegoat works because it's in line with your own agenda in the case of major media outlets.
We don't need stricter laws on the sale of violent video games. What we need is better parenting, or at least parents who are more aware of their kids' behavior.
We have laws or at least policies in place that prevent the sale of certain games to certain age groups. A GameStop employee who sells an M-rated game to a kid gets fired and blacklisted from employment from any GameStop. The company gets fined, and I've heard that the employee can go to jail for selling an M-rated game to a kid, as it's on par with selling alcohol to a minor. One time I was at a GameStop and there was a father who bought a copy of Grand Theft Auto 5 for his kid who had to be 7 years old. The GameStop employee said that it was an M-rated game, had extreme violence, drug and alcohol references, and the whole 9 yards, and the father just nodded and dismissed it. You know what that tells me? That parents buy violent games for their kids so much that GameStop employees can very quickly rattle off the inappropriate content of the game, and the father being dismissive of the content in the game being inappropriate for his kid shows a laissez-faire attitude about it.
And if you're writing a comment right now about how your parents let you play violent video games as a kid and blah blah blah, just hold on a second, you're getting way too ahead of me.
What if that kid played GTA 5 then went and shot his mother? Who would you blame? A, the kid for imitating something you saw in a game, B, the game itself, Or C, the father who ignored the GameStop employee's warnings instead of taking into consideration that the game might have been inappropriate for his son? If you answered C, you are correct. The father could have said, "You know, I don't want to subject my son to this level of violence just yet. I don't think he's ready." If you answered A, you're partially correct, as that answer falls back on the parents teaching the kid the difference between reality and fantasy. So if your parents did let you play violent games, congratulations. They taught you the difference between reality and fantasy and felt that you were responsible enough to not imitate something you see in a game. Let me bring up two other real-world examples. Remember the kid who played GTA 4 and shot his grandmother? What got blamed? The violent video game, when the truth is, the parents or guardian should have been blamed. They didn't teach the kid reality from fantasy, and they left a gun in an easy, accessible place the kid could get to.
And this comes down to common sense, which is so rare that it's a superpower.
What about the kid who imitated a mission from GTA 5 where he snuck onto an airplane and flew to another state? Once again, the game got blamed. But when we look deeper into it, and here's where it gets scary, the kid has a history of behavior issues and the parents still let him play the game. They let him walk the streets alone because they thought he was going to a friend's house and they know he has behavior problems. And they let him out unsupervised? Obviously, that falls back on the parents. It doesn't take a genius to see that. If you're a parent, you need to take responsibility for your kid to make sure they don't do bad things and correct the child when they do bad things. If they have problems you can't fix, take the child to a specialist for help, because what you're doing isn't helping and ignoring it won't make the problem go away. If you want to prevent the next Adam Lanza, don't wait for something bad to happen then try to find a scapegoat. I would say start giving children psychiatric evaluations, and not by a school psychologist. I mean by a psychologist that works with criminals. As extreme as that sounds, it just may work.
Speaking of psychology, remember when I said that for every test that says that video games do increase aggression, there's one that says that they don't? Well, shouldn't that tell you that there's something amiss?
When they say that violent video games increase aggression, is it really making that person aggressive for the long term? Or is it making them aggressive only in the heat of the moment and eventually they will calm down and be their usual selves? Are they aggressive because they're frustrated at the game because they're having a hard time with it? Or is it due to video game addiction? There's a lot of questions to be answered when it comes to this. If they're addicted to video games and are aggressive because of it, then it's not the game, it's the addiction. If you've ever met someone who's addicted to something, you'll notice that they become aggressive until they get their next fix. If the person is aggressive while playing, it could be that they're just really immersed into the game, and when they put that controller down, everything's fine. Or if they're still aggressive, they may be coming down from the adrenaline high, and will return to their normal selves after they've calmed down and fully left the fantasy world. I know that after I've seen a new Fast and Furious movie, the first thing I want to do is go street racing. Reason being is because I got really absorbed into the movie because I enjoyed it so much. But I won't do anything that stupid in my car because I know that I got into an accident, I would more than likely die. Or if the game really did make the person aggressive, maybe they should be looking into that person more carefully, as they could be predispositioned for violent behavior regardless if they played the violent games or not.
And another thing is, the people who pay for these studies will skew them to fit their own purposes.
Bringing up Jack Thompson again, there was another violence in video game study done which wielded a result of maybe. The test was essentially inconclusive. Jack Thompson took it as a yes, that video games do make people violent. The researchers even spoke out against Thompson, saying that they didn't have any conclusive results. I don't remember where I read that because it was years ago. As of right now, the most recent study I read said that video games do increase aggression, but I guarantee you that the next study will be inconclusive or say that violent games do not increase aggression. The study I'm more likely to agree with is one that happened in 2010, where it said that violent games may cause aggression in some, but not in others. I lean to that study being accurate because it all depends on the people that are being tested. Some people may have an aggressive reaction to violent games and others may not. And like I said earlier, people who become aggressive from playing a game may have a predisposition to being an aggressive person. And that person should be studied further to see if they're predisposed to being violent, as that would mean anything. Video games, movies, and even driving to work could set them off.
You'll hear this phrase a lot, that correlation does not equal causation. Now, what that means is just because one thing happened, that doesn't mean another thing is going to happen just because they both share the same variable.
Let's look at Columbine, Virginia Tech, and Sandy Hook again. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold played Doom a lot, and they said that what they were going to do was going to be just like Doom. And there was a rumor that they built a Doom map just like the layout of their school to use as practice. I will note that the Doom map is a rumor, and if it did exist, it's been long deleted. So if you said they played a violent game and therefore decided to do this, that sounds pretty silly when said out loud. But when you look at Eric Harris's history of aggressive behavior, which could have been caused by the video game, but could have been caused by bullying, or even the medication he was taking, or an undiagnosed problem. Cho didn't play video games but had a lot of mental health issues. Adam Lanza played mostly non-violent games like Dance Dance Revolution and Super Mario. He had Asperger's syndrome, which is not a cause for aggressive or psychotic behavior, but it's possible that he had other issues that went undiagnosed like schizophrenia or psychopathy because his parents thought his strange behavior was due to him having Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism. So out of those 3 examples I gave, only 2 shootings had perpetrators that played video games, and only 1 out of those 2 played violent ones.
You can't say that a violent game caused a violent crime, as only 1 out of the 3 examples had a violent game. What you can say is that all 3 crimes were the result of mental instability.
It's not an issue of violent games. It's an issue of mentally unstable people causing crimes because they're not in the right state of mind. Let me give you 2 other examples. The Aurora, Colorado shootings and the Norway bombings. James Egan Holmes shot up a movie theater and waited outside for the cops to arrest him, and he booby-trapped his apartment. That's David Berkowitz crazy. And prior to the shooting, he showed signs of mental illness and made homicidal threats and was considered a threat to the public by his psychiatrist, who chose not to hospitalize him for unknown reasons. The guy who did the Norway bombings is nuttier than squirrel poop because he felt and still feels that what he did was the right thing to do. That is psychotic, and even his reasoning for doing it is pure insanity. Many years ago, I think in the mid-80s but possibly early 90s, there was a serial arsonist who committed arson to calm the voices in his head. From all these examples I've given, we can say that it's not violent games, but mental illness, and that's what needs to be focused on to prevent people from committing a violent crime, as through early detection and taking reports of possibly dangerous people seriously.
But now we gotta ask ourselves, do some games go too far when it comes to violence?
While the subject of violent games leading to violent crimes is really a scapegoat to ignore the underlying and true problem of mental illness, there are people who do think that games along with movies, music, and books do go too far, and this topic is more subjective as it varies from person to person, because it's opinion-based. In my opinion, yeah, games can go too far when it comes to violence, but it's very, very rare when a game crosses that line that it shouldn't. And again, that's opinion-based, and I'll come back to that in a bit. The thing with video game violence is that it's cartoonish. Blood and guts just don't splatter all over the place in real life like they do in games, movies, and TV, unless it's extremely brutal. But in games, a slight cut of blood causes it to shoot out like the human body is a balloon full of blood. What happens in games is not real. It's not actually happening. However, it doesn't mean that we can't be disturbed by what we see in the game. Let me bring up Manhunt. Yeah, that game. One of the most controversial games of its time.
And here's the thing, it really just comes down to what your personal line is when it comes to violence in video games, or violence in any media, really.
I honestly thought I had no line when it came to video game violence. I played some pretty gruesome games, like Doom, Doom 2, Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 2011, The Last of Us and Tomb Raider 2013. But it really wasn't until Manhunt where I met my personal line when it came to violence in games. Even the programmers at Rockstar said that Manhunt crossed the line as there was nearly a mutiny over the game, meaning that some of them refused to work on it. And if you don't think that you have a line when it comes to violence, trust me, you do. You just haven't found it yet. Even in Uncharted 2 Among Thieves, a game that I have no issues with when it comes to the violence in it, I cringed every time I snapped an opponent's neck because it was such a realistic snapping of bone sound. Gears of War, an extremely bloody game. The first time I saw the Lancer being used, my friend said that my face lit up like a kid on Christmas. I thought it was awesome as the blood sprayed everywhere, but something about Manhunt just crossed the line for me. It didn't cross it by far, more like stepping over it, but still crossing nonetheless. And I think it may be due to the premise of the game and how realistically for its time the violence was portrayed.
I'll be honest, I don't like the Saw or Hostel movies, and as hypocritical as it sounds, I love the first RoboCop movie, but again, it comes down to what your personal lines are.
I can't tell you if a game is too violent or not. It's not a decision I can make for you. If I say in a review that a game is way too violent, that's not a fact, but an opinion. It's up to you to look at the game and decide for yourself if it's too violent, as it comes down to what your personal line for violence is. But then we dive into some other territories like rape. Again, with Tomb Raider 2013. When it was being showed off, they showed the scene where it looks like the guy's about to grope Lara's butt, and it looks like he's going to rape her. And even the people showing off the game said that she was going to get raped. There was a huge backlash for it, which I find hypocritical. So murdering people in games is perfectly fine, but rape isn't? Yeah, rape is a bad thing to portray in games, but you're not the person committing the act, and in most games, you're the good guy who kills others because they're the bad guys trying to kill you. But there are games where you play as evil characters, or the game allows you to choose between good and evil. Grand Theft Auto, for example. You're not playing good people. You play as criminals, and it can cause some severe destruction.
Which brings up an interesting thing. I saw a poll on Joystick about having context for your violent actions in games, and the results were Pretty surprising.
At time of writing, 51% of people said yes, they want their actions to be justified, and 49% said no. It was pretty evenly divided, being off by only 1%. And as I read through the comments, I saw that the comments reflected the near even divide, resulting in a very blurred view on the subject. It was dependent on the game or what the gamer was looking for in terms of entertainment. If the gamer wanted a shut off your brain action game, that didn't matter to them because of how they wanted to have fun. But if they wanted something like a deep story or became emotionally connected to the characters they played as, they almost always chose non-lethal methods. And that line of thinking is true with any and all forms of entertainment. It depends on what you're looking for in terms of being entertained. Some people said that a game is just a game and saying that doesn't really matter if your actions have a reason or not because it's all just make-believe. But there are people out there who do get lost in the fantasy. They could have no history of mental illness and could be completely neurotypical and have never had any type of mental problem or disability. But they got so absorbed into the game that they thought it was real and could no longer tell the difference between reality from fantasy.
And that's where it boils down to. You need to be able to separate the lines between reality and fantasy.
I see no issue with kids playing violent games. I can even see the benefit of where a kid is presented with tough choices that have dire consequences. It can help kids mature faster as a lot of the games meant for older players have tough choices, especially nowadays as the technology in games now allows for more realism. Granted, there are kids who can't handle it and that's why they're screaming 9-year-olds all over Xbox Live, but that's where the parents need to come in. As a parent, you should teach your child the difference between reality and fantasy and supervise them as they play a violent game to make sure they have an understanding of what's going on. And if they're yelling and screaming at people on Xbox Live, step in as a parent and shut the game off, correct the behavior and have them calm down. I don't think we can say that violent video games cause violent behavior, especially with our society as it is now. There's been studies that show that kids are getting dumber, which I blame on lazy teachers actually. I've seen the movie Bully. Those teachers just do not care. You can turn on the news to see someone in their late 30s to someone so old they have one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel, yell and scream about petty issues that don't affect their lives in any way, but yet it makes them angry.
If violent video games do cause aggression, then our entire political system must be full of hardcore gamers, as all Republicans and Democrats do is yell at each other.
If video games cause violence, then religion and politics must take the cake, as I see people get into the most heated arguments over religion and especially politics. The Crusades that were started in 1095 by the Catholic Church was essentially believe in our religion or we'll kill you. You can't say that video games caused them to be that way because video games didn't exist back then. I don't subscribe to the notion that we as humans are violent by nature, because we technically have no reason to be violent. We live in a very technologically sophisticated time right now, which has made us lazy. We have smartphones that pull any information or entertainment we want out of thin air. That laziness is a result of us being able to get anything we want almost instantly, and has resulted in us demanding quick results. And when we don't get those results when we want them, we get angry. Now you may be wondering what that entire side trip was for. Simply put, I'm listing off reasons why someone may get violent, which brings us back to correlation does not equal causation. Scenario 1. Someone plays a violent game, goes out and shoots someone. Scenario 2. Someone can't get service with their cell phone and then bashes someone's head in with a cell phone. It's the same scenario. One person kills another, only the game gets blamed for the crime and not the spotty cell phone coverage.
What I'm really getting at here, and to sum this up as a too long didn't watch because this has gone on for 9 pages of script so far, is that you cannot link violent crimes to violent video games because there's way too many factors to draw conclusive results from.
Yes, there's been great strides in psychology and I am not doubting any of it. But when you have tests that are being funded by a party who have no concern for the scientific process but yet want confirmation of what they already believe, things get skewed. This is called confirmation bias, where someone has already reached a conclusion and goes to do research to find anything they can to support their claim, which in that process completely omits anything and everything that would harm their belief because that's not what they're looking for. Like when I said earlier about Jack Thompson, who took research that didn't draw any conclusive results, but he took what he wanted from the test so he could try to confirm what he already believed was the truth. There are factors like mental stability, mental illness, mental disabilities, how someone was raised in their home as they grew up, how society has affected them over the course of their life. Someone could have had just a really bad day, and that one thing sent them over the edge. And when that person snaps, people get scared and start the witch hunt. And if that person played games, you can bet that's what will be blamed, because it's an easy target and it'll only be a matter of time until something else comes along that will take the blame. If there's one good thing to take away from this is that video games aren't getting blamed as often as they used to, but we'll probably still get the finger pointed at them at times due to lazy investigative work.
Look, you cannot blame the game because someone did a violent thing. They did that of their own free will, and why that's so hard to comprehend? I really don't know, but the witch hunts can stop.